And so whenever you remember Jamie, I should think you couldn't be glad enough there was somebody you could help, just as you'd want folks to help Jamie wherever he is." Mrs. Carew shivered and gave a little moan. "Oh, but I want my Jamie," she grieved. Pollyanna nodded with understanding eyes. "I know. The child's presence. Mr. Pendleton told me about it. Only you've got the woman's hand." "Woman's hand?" "Yes, to make a home, you know. He said that it took a woman's hand or a child's presence to make a home. That was when he wanted me, and I found him Jimmy, and he adopted him instead." "Jimmy?" Mrs. Carew looked up with a startled something in her eyes that always came into them at the mention of any variant of that name. "Yes, Jimmy Bean." "Oh, Bean," said Mrs. Carew, relaxing. "Yes, he was from an orphan's home, and he ran away. I found him. He said he wanted another kind of home with a mother in it instead of a matron. I couldn't find him the mother part, but I found him Mr. Pendleton, and he adopted him. His name is Jimmy Pendleton now." "But it was Bean?" "Yes, it was Bean." "Oh," said Mrs. Carew, this time with a long sigh. Mrs. Carew saw a good deal of Sadie Dean during the days that followed the New Year's Eve party. She saw a good deal of Jamie, too. In one way and another Pollyanna contrived to have them frequently at the house, and this Mrs. Carew, much to her surprise and vexation, could not seem to prevent. Her consent and even her delight were taken by Pollyanna as so much a matter of course that she found herself helpless to convince the child that neither approval nor satisfaction entered into the matter at all, as far as she was concerned. But Mrs. Carew, whether she herself realized it or not, was learning many things she could never have learned in the old days, shut up in her rooms, with orders to Mary to admit no one. She was learning something of what it means to be a lonely young girl in a big city, with one's living to earn, and with no one to care except one who cares too much and too little. "But what did you mean?" she nervously asked Sadie Dean one evening. "What did you mean that first day in the store, what you said about helping the girls?" Sadie Dean colored distressfully. "I'm afraid I was rude," she apologized. "Never mind that. Tell me what you meant. I've thought of it so many times since." For a moment the girl was silent. Then, a little bitterly, she said: "'Twas because I knew a girl once, and I was thinking of her. She came from my town, and she was pretty and good, but she wa'n't over strong. For a year we pulled together, sharing the same room, boiling our eggs over the same gas jet, and eating our hash and fish balls for supper at the same cheap restaurant. There was never anything to do evenings but to walk in the Common, or go to the movies, if we had the dime to blow in, or just stay in our room. Well, our room wasn't very pleasant. It was hot in summer and cold in winter, and the gas jet was so measly and so flickery that we couldn't sew or read, even if we hadn't been too fagged out to do either, which we most generally was. Besides, over our heads was a squeaky board that someone was always rocking on, and under us was a feller that was learning to play the cornet. Did you ever hear anyone learn to play the cornet?" "No, I don't think so," murmured Mrs. Carew. "Well, you've missed a lot," said the girl dryly. Then, after a moment, she resumed her story. "Sometimes, 'specially at Christmas and holidays, we used to walk up here on the Avenue and other streets, huntin' for windows where the curtains were up, and we could look in. You see, we were pretty lonesome them days, 'specially, and we said it did us good to see homes with folks, and lamps on the center tables, and children playin' games. But we both of us knew that really it only made us feel worse than ever, because we were so hopelessly out of it all. 'Twas even harder to see the automobiles and the gay young folks in them, laughing and chattering. You see, we were young, and I suspect we wanted to laugh and chatter. We wanted a good time, too. And by, my chum began to have it, this good time. Well, to make a long story short, we broke partnership one day, and she went her way and I mine. I didn't like the company she was keepin', and I said so. She wouldn't give 'em up, so we quit. I didn't see her again for 'most 2 years. Then I got a note from her, and I went. This was just last month. She was in one of them rescue homes. It was a lovely place, soft rugs, fine pictures, plants, flowers, and books, a piano, a beautiful room, and everything possible done for her. Rich women came in their automobiles and carriages to take her driving, and she was taken to concerts and matinees. She was learning stenography, and they were going to help her to a position just as soon as she could take it. Everybody was wonderfully good to her, she said, and showed they wanted to help her in every way. But she said something else, too. She said, "Sadie, if they'd taken 1/2 the pains to show me they cared and wanted to help long ago when I was an honest, self-respecting, hard-working, homesick girl, I wouldn't have been here for them to help now. And, well, I never forgot it. That's all. It ain't that I'm objecting to the rescue work. It's a fine thing, and they ought to do it. Only I'm thinkin' there wouldn't be quite so much of it for them to do if they'd just show a little of their interest earlier in the game." "But I thought there were working girls' homes and settlement houses that did that sort of thing," faltered Mrs. Carew, in a voice that few of her friends would have recognized. "There are. Did you ever see the inside of one of them?" "Why, no, though I have given money to them." This time Mrs. Carew's voice was almost apologetically pleading in tone. Sadie Dean smiled curiously. "Yes, I know. There are lots of good women that have given money to them, and have never seen the inside of one of them. Please don't understand that I'm saying anything against the homes. I'm not. They're good things. They're almost the only thing that's doing anything to help. But they're only a drop in the bucket to what is really needed. I tried one once, but there was an air about it. Somehow I felt But there, what's the use? Probably they aren't all like that one, and maybe the fault was with me. If I should try to tell you, you wouldn't understand. You'd have to live in it, and you haven't even seen the inside of one. But I can't help wondering sometimes why so many of those good women never seem to put the real heart and interest into the preventin' that they do into the rescuin'. But there, I didn't mean to talk such a lot, but you asked me." "Yes, I asked you," said Mrs. Carew, in a half-stifled voice, as she turned away. Not only from Sadie Dean, however, was Mrs. Carew learning things never learned before, but from Jamie also. Jamie was there a great deal. Pollyanna liked to have him there, and he liked to be there. At first, to be sure, he had hesitated, but very soon he had quieted his doubts and yielded to his longings by telling himself and Pollyanna that, after all, visiting was not staying for keeps. Mrs. Carew often found the boy and Pollyanna contentedly settled on the library window seat with the empty wheelchair close by. Sometimes they were poring over a book. She heard Jamie tell Pollyanna one day that he didn't think he'd mind so very much being lame if he had so many books as Mrs. Carew, and that he guessed he'd be so happy he'd fly clean away if he had both books and legs. Sometimes the boy was telling stories, and Pollyanna was listening, wide-eyed and absorbed. Mrs. Carew wondered at Pollyanna's interest until one day she herself stopped and listened. After that she wondered no longer, but she listened a great deal longer. crude and incorrect.